Those who become are those who never settle. They know that there is always a better and greater version.
Believers, in times of adversity, remember to anchor your faith in God's unwavering love and promises. Trust in His divine plan and find strength in His presence. May this message serve as a source of encouragement and reaffirm your unshakable relationship with Him. Remain blessed as you listen.
Fullness of Christ involves 3 dimensions of Him. Maybe I should say that quickly. When the Bible talks about the fullness of Christ, there is a theological explanation. Number 1, the nature of Christ, His character. Number 2, the wisdom of Christ. Number 3, the power of Christ. So every time you talk about the fullness of Christ, your mind should go to these 3 dimensions. Number 1, the nature, the character of Christ, the fruit of the Spirit. Number 2, the wisdom of Christ. Are we together now? What the Bible calls the mind of Christ. And then number 3, the works of Christ. Anybody who walks in these 3 dimensions is operating in the fullness of Christ. You can walk in the power of Christ and not the nature of Christ. Something will be wrong with that presentation. You can walk in the wisdom of Christ and not walk in the power of Christ. You can walk in the nature of Christ and not walk in the power of Christ. But God desires witnesses who operate this 3-fold dimension. And every problem you see in the church through history is because one dimension was ignored, or one dimension, we call it different names. I'm not speaking in a pastor's conference, but go and trace through Bible history. Every time God was misrepresented, one of these 3 components was found wanting. Either someone emphasized his wisdom at the expense of his nature, no character, or someone emphasized his nature and there was no power to validate his presence, or someone contended for power and there was no wisdom to guide the administration of that power. Maybe this is a sermon for someone. Go back and teach your people that the fullness of Christ is a representation, a wholesome representation of his nature, his wisdom, and his power. Let's say it together: his nature, his wisdom. Show me a believer who is trained by the Spirit to capture this. I show you a mighty tool, a mighty end time tool. And I believe this is what God is doing even with conferences like this. This is what God is doing through several vessels. Many of you here, He is granting grace. There are people who have been greatly aligned along the area of his nature. Others his wisdom, others his power. But what God is doing is he's bringing a synergy. You can't say I understand his nature, that means I stay there. You will have great people with character, but they will die of sickness. They will not go forward, they will not advance. Albeit you will see holiness and righteousness and purity. Then there are others, you will see wisdom. CEOs will come out, professionals, intellectuals, but spiritually speaking, one yoke from darkness will bring them down, bring the business down, because it says, say unto God, how terrible art thou in thy works, it is through the greatness of thy power. Wisdom builds, power retains. So if the only thing you have to build is wisdom, retainership is not there, there will not be longevity of impact. Are we learning? Let me tell you the truth. You can test your training with the Holy Spirit by checking these 3 indices I just mentioned. That's how you know it is God training you or it's a familiar spirit. If it is another spirit training you, and I'm not being sarcastic, you will never find this tripartite formation. Only the Spirit of God has capacity to build a believer in a wholesome way that captures character, the nature of Christ, the wisdom of Christ, I say this with all due respect. If you are a servant of the living God here, may God grant us greater grace to be able to communicate this threefold dimension, because our members will be a reflection of the degree or otherwise of our communicating this area. None of these three should be emphasized above another. This is the threefold cord that cannot be easily broken. The nature of Christ, the wisdom of Christ, the character of Christ. Are we together? And the way God trains men, I'm going to be wrapping up with that area. That when God trains men, as far as your witness is concerned, you will never be given the assignment of doing all three. No. Number one, it will weigh down on you. The biases required to be a professional in one or three of this area will not even allow you to be proficient in all three. All three will work in you, but you cannot dispense all three to the nations. He limited it that way so that the body will respect itself. Are we together? So chances are excellent that if you want to teach on character, you most likely, with all due respect, you may not go and bring maybe someone who is a general manager somewhere to come and teach you on character. You understand? Holiness, righteousness. No. The general manager may generally teach you on growth principles, how to scale your business. That is the wisdom of Christ. It doesn't mean he does not know anything about holiness. But that training, his training, he stays there. I'm teaching you this so that you know that where God trained you or what he trained you at is not the only thing required. You see, when he's teaching you on character, it will look like wisdom and power is not important. It is the bias that comes with training. It is your recognition that there are other dimensions needed in my life but not captured in my experience. So it will help you to respect other dimensions when you see and also receive it. But I can tell you this, you know that your training with the Holy Spirit is effective when you find a healthy blend of the building of the nature of Christ, the wisdom of Christ, and the power of Christ. You are not at liberty to choose which one. No. A student does not choose what the lecturer teaches him. The lecturer knows what you need to graduate. Are we together now? Some courses are boring. Some courses have greater credit unit than others. Your assignment is to sit down. There are courses that look like forever. Others you finish in 2 weeks. The School of the Spirit is not like an academic institution. You can finish one class in 2 weeks and the next class will be 3 years. And yet you are not repeating. That's how the class is. The curriculum is just long enough. I hope you are learning.